And here we are, we're back again. Right, we're on the baubles as per our class this morning. Now, I've drawn these in. I did say to you, you can buy these stencils with like thousands of little circle shapes in. However, they're expensive. And if you don't need to spend the money, don't spend it. So milk bottle tops, you get various sizes. They're perfect. Throw them in your art kit. You'll be using them time and again for lots of different things. So these baubles are not drawn by hand because my circles are never circles, and it's just much easier, far more sensible to save yourself the hassle. So just find something that's circular at the sort of size that you want it to be. As I say, with these, I just did it with milk bottle tops. All I'm doing now is lightening the pencil lines down. I left them in quite dark so that you would see them on the camera, but I really don't want them showing up in my work particularly. Some of it you can camouflage, but some of it you can't. Colours that I'm using for this, I've got quinacridone gold. If you don't have that colour, then you can mix a little bit of raw sienna and lemon yellow, or cadmium yellow with lemon yellow actually gives you nice colours. And then for the shadow on the light one, I'll be using a little bit of burnt umber. The other colour that I'm using is phalo blue, but you can use ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, basically any of the blues that you like. Windsor blue is quite nice. You don't want something that's going to leave too much stain on the paper. And then the other colour that I'm using is actually Scarlet Lake, but alizarin crimson or cad red or rose, all equally good, just depends what you want to do. So I'm going to start on the furthest one, and I'm just wetting mainly towards the middle of the circle. Again, I don't really need to worry so much about the edge because I'm going to go in. I'm taking off excess water so that it's wet, but it's not going to be running everywhere. And I'm going to do that when I'm going to start with the blue. I'm going to put the yellow in the middle just because I want to. So I'm picking up my blue. I'm using the larger of my Rosemary's brushes, and I will try not to bump the camera because I don't want people getting seasick watching me, but I'll do my best. And I'm just using the side of the brush rather than the tip to push it right up. And because it's nice and damp, it's bleeding all by itself. So I'm just using the side of the brush to push it right up to that pencil line. It will tend to look slightly darker there anyway, purely because I didn't put water there. So although I shouldn't end up with any hard lines, the areas around that edge will look slightly darker because obviously it's wet paint going onto dry paper. So just try and smooth it round, and I'm concentrating on getting a reasonable edge in first before I do anything else. So that's in. You can see it's moved about a bit, so I just want to create the impression that the light on this is coming more from the front than from one of the sides. So I'm just encouraging this to bleed a little bit more. I'm going to leave little scraps of light here and there. Go back in with a second coat of the paint, again pushing it right over to that edge. Because it's wet, it will carry on bleeding, and I want to get some darker colour up under that top edge there. So that's almost like my shadow area. But because the front of it is where the main light is being fixed. Now I've got a little tiny bit of the greyish colour on here just to add a little bit more shadow up there. Damping my brush off. And these blues can be very, very difficult to sort of get rid of. And I'm just allowing this to blend and bleed back. I'm going into the white area now. So I've cleaned my brush off quite well. And I'm just going into this lighter area just to soften it. I'm going to go along the bottom here, and I've got an angle on this one, so I'm going in just along this bottom area here and just creating a little ridge. Clean my brush off quite well. And just want to sort of move that around slightly there, and also underneath a little bit, just to soften it away. And move it over to that side. And then I'm going to leave that to dry. I'm going to go into the red one next, which is on the far side. Again, just wet the whole thing. Leave it. As I say, I'm using pretty much Scarlet Lake on this one. Now some colours will be more transparent than others. Have a play with what colours you've got in your palette and see what works for you. But this one's quite, I think, it's quite a nice red. If you get any bleeds that are happening outside of your bauble, don't panic on that, because there's some steps to take at the end that might actually account for that. So again, I'm going to put a little bit more around that edge and a lot more around this edge. Bring it all the way down to the bottom. And I just quite like this colour. It's not one that I use an awful lot, but it's every so often it's like I rediscover it. A little bit stronger towards the top here. Again, I'm just using its own colour to create the shadow. I've got a little tiny bleed on the edge there. It's not the end of the world. It will be fine. I'm putting my second little rim around the bottom. Just shaping this round a little bit so it's more rounded looking. And you can go in, once it's dry, you can go in and add another layer if you want to or you need to. So it's not a panic about things. Soften that up. Here we go. Just a little bit darker there. Clean it off. And just soften this away here. And we're going to have a nice little sheet on this because I'm going to use some metallic paints after the event. So all I'm doing here is wetting on the outside there where I've got that little bleed. Press it out, but in all honesty, it's not going to matter in a minute. So next one, gold one, I've sort of cleaned the brush. But if you can see my water, you'll realise it's not very clean. So this is the quinacridone gold, which is a colour I do really like. I have little spells with it where I'll use it a lot and then I won't use it for ages. But I always find I end up getting it out around Christmas card time. And it is a lovely rich golden yellow. So this one, just pull. So this is just the same colour, it's just slightly thicker, slightly richer. I'm going to pull that right through there. And then all I'm going to do is pick up a tiny little bit. I haven't cleaned the brush, so the yellow is still on the brush, but I've just picked up a little tiny bit of burnt sienna, and that's what I'm using as my sort of shadow colour on this. And I definitely want to get some up and around there. But it's still wet, it's still settling and bleeding in quite nicely. So I'm going to leave, I've got a little light area there, I'm going to leave it where it is. And this bauble has more light hitting it square on than either of the other two. So I can afford to leave that. The little attachment bits at the top, I'm just going to use a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm not really worried about painting the whole thing, so don't get too picky with it. Sometimes it looks better when it's not quite perfect. Now, I've got some pencil marks in this. On this occasion, I'm leaving them in because it makes my life easy. And this is one of those occasions where pencil marks can actually add rather than just having them in for the sake of it. So I'm going back, still using my rosemary brush, and I'm just creating a rounded look to this. And there's my little wire thing that catches on. This one. Nice thing about this is it gives it more of a three-dimensional look. It doesn't have to be a massive amount of colour. As I say, this has got a very small amount of burnt sienna in it. Doesn't look too bad, does it? You could go in and do a little bit more detailing. I'll move down to my number 6 Rosemary's brush, just picking up a slightly stronger mix of the burnt sienna, and just strengthening up those little circle bits that actually make it look three-dimensional. You do want a brush with a reasonable tip on it for this. Otherwise you end up with this blobby edge, which is not necessarily what you want. That's not a technical term, that's just a fact. And then but sometimes a little bit of freedom on it works out better. So I'm just going to lightly, I'm still using those light colours. Again, don't get too picky with it. I've got my pencil line still in there. It doesn't matter. It actually adds to it on this occasion. You could swap down to a rigger if you need to. So I've got that in. I'm just picking up tiny little bit of the gunk that's in my tray, which is a nice dark colour. Just along the under edge of that. But I'm not attempting to cover the whole thing. So this is gunk. You could use any colour you like. Greys, stay on the semi-neutral. And all I'm doing is putting a little bit of the shadow underneath here. And we're going to call that finished in a second. So going back to my slightly bigger brush. And this is why I said don't have a panic attack if you bleed out around the edges, as long as it's not too drastic. I'm just avoiding contact with the bauble itself, and I'm just pulling some water around it. I'm going to do the same on all of them so that I can just let them sort of blend and bleed a little bit around the edges. And there's where that bleed doesn't matter. So I'm going to go with the lightest one first, just because it's easier not to pollute. I'm just going to go in around this bauble. You could go and have all sorts of wonderful shadows and things if you want to, but it's unnecessary. Remember, you're painting Christmas cards, not a masterpiece. So I've gone with that one. Tiny little bit of the pink. Some fresh water and just soften this away. It also has the effect of giving you a little bit of a background without having to go through the effort. So all the way down here, I'm just softening it away. And then finally, touch the blue. Blue, like I say, lights can light up your world without you wanting it to. So I'm just putting a little bit of blue, just a very small amount down here. Again, just go around it. Just remember, blue and yellow give you some interesting greens. Tiny bit more maybe. And that just creates a really nice, soft look. So, and then I can do the same at the top. So I'm going back in, picking up a bit of the yellow ochre. Not too much, just touching it in underneath what would be your rope or your line. Brush off. Soften it pretty much underneath, so you're just leaving a fairly small trace behind. And if this was hanging against your wall, that's what you'd get. You'd get these little, almost like a reflected glow from them. And hey presto, we're done. Baubles finished. Now, if you wanted to, and you have any, sorry, move them over here. You can buy these metallic paints. You can buy them and they can cost a fortune. You can buy them and they're very cheap. Mine are very cheap. I'm quite proud to admit that to you. So all I'm doing is reactivating them. They work with water. I'll go in with this very pale gold colour. All I'm going to do is just add a little bit to the brighter areas. Sometimes you can barely notice them. But for Christmas cards and things like that, they have quite a nice effect. I think far nicer than putting tons of glitter on, but that's just my opinion. You can do what you like. And then on the blue one, I'm going with the silver. Again, I don't want to get into the realms of covering the whole thing. because it rather defeats the object of just having a few little points of shine. Just a little bit up there. And on the pink, I'm going to do the silver again on that. And just a few little pulls here and there, especially on those little areas where I've got more light. A little bit on there. So it just sets it up nicely. And then for the rope, I'm going to use a little bit of the bronzy coloured one because I like it. There's no other reason. And I'm just going to put a few little touches along there. I'm not by any means attempting to paint the entire line. I don't think it's necessary. Sometimes less is more. And this just picks up and gives it a little glitter. So if you were going to give that to somebody as a present, as a Christmas card, that would be lovely. And then don't forget, sign your work, even if it's a Christmas card. Okay, thanks, bye.